to us from San Antonio, Texas now, but is originally from Hamilton, Ontario. The big book tells us the spiritual life is not a theory, it's a way of life. And John has helped me learn how to put this into practice in my daily life. I'm looking forward to the exciting ride John has promised us tonight. So John, without further ado, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody. Good to see each of you. And I really hope that whatever your expectations are tonight, that they're met. And I really like you to think that when you leave this meeting tonight, that you'll be inspired to be in the presence of a loving gaze of God. That's really what my aim is. You know, first of all, I'm an alcoholic, a drunk from a GAPE group in Hamilton, Ontario. Presently in the beautiful city of San Antonio, Texas. I'm on what I call a complete joy adventure, visiting new communities in different countries. I'm 74 years old and I've become a nomad, visiting different countries and different experiences. And I'll tell you a little bit about that, not in this session, but in other sessions. But bottom line was I wanted to experience the world again. And I think about a 5-year-old boy seeing a rainbow for the first time. And that's what my new adventure is all about. So I've been separated from alcohol by the grace of God since December 23rd, 1972, which is my 50th year of sobriety. And since this is an honest program, I have to tell you that I came in at the age of 2. Not so funny, I know. Okay. The intention, in fact, the promise of this series is for you to experience an expanding God consciousness in your life. And I know it's our sincere hope that Fellowship of the Spirit has been delivering on that promise. And this is a fact. I know that you know the larger truths in which we've been talking about. In other words, this isn't new information. But my hope is that maybe you're practicing a little bit more or coming at it a little bit differently to experience the presence of God. And that's what this is all about, is to experience something, not necessarily to learn something. You know, in my professional life and indeed my service in AA, what we fail to recognize sometimes is that practice is what's important, not simply learning or knowing something. And it's in the practice that we open up a whole new life and we begin to understand at a deeper level. You know, it's wonderful to learn something and to know something and to begin to understand something. Each of us in our own way have desires to do that. And we trust our ability to really take on new learning and new ideas in the big book and other materials so that we would get to know something. However, that's not really truly understanding something. It only comes in practice. So this isn't to point fingers at anybody. It's just something that I realized over my lifetime, that I was conditioned to listen, to learn, and to regurgitate what I knew so that I could become a good student. But when you're an adult, you learn differently for different reasons. When you examine it, you learn to do something different, to be something different. And tonight is a great example of how we can practice something that will change your life. I can guarantee it. There's something powerful and mystical about the experience of meditation. And although there are many forms of meditation, I'm not suggesting one's better than the other, but I've taken on silent meditation 25 years ago, and that's which I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm going to be talking about my experience around silent meditation, and why silence, in my view, is important. So if you're hoping, and you're the kind of person that gets attracted to new information, chasing the next new book, maybe getting a new sponsor, maybe going to different meetings, maybe listening to that recording, and somehow or another, and the next thing looks like the best thing, I'll ask you to consider to stop tonight. Consider, stop chasing that brass ring, just for tonight. And know that you're in a perfect place to experience God's presence. Whether what you know or what you don't know, or how long you've been sober, or what other addictions that you may have. Tonight is about being available. This is session 5 of an 8 series. And the first 4 set that we're now walking out of the woods, by the way, we're no longer walking in it, we're walking out of it. And what we've been talking about is simple things, foundational truths in AA. We're talking about powerlessness. We're talking about beliefs. We're talking about making a decision to turn our will and our life over the care of God. We're talking about cleaning up our past. We're talking about the false self versus the true self. We're talking about the defects of character and lies and gives rise to in the false self and not the true self. See, the false self gets hurt, gets angry, gets upset. The true self is not defended or offended. It is whole and pure. And I like to think meditation is the channel downward to that experience. Downward in a sense of the spirituality of descent, where you're not required to know something. You're just required to surrender and to let go and to allow. These are words that are big words. We know them very well. We often repeat them. And then we move on to the next thing. Next new book, perhaps. Yet in these words of surrendering and powerlessness and letting go and abandoning can be in itself a lifelong experience. See, in my view, there's 2 things that we do in life. One is that we play God, or we avoid God. And in meditation, it's about letting go of this notion, this illusion that we can play God, that we have the power to change, we have the power to fix, we have the power to do things that we have no control over. And meditation is a deliberate an act of letting go of all of that. It's being in the presence. So I assert this will be the most significant journey of a lifetime. Now, you may be already meditated, and you may already be a mature meditator. And in meditation, there are no boundaries. There's just an expanse. There are no limits. We can always grow and deepen our meditative experience. So allow yourself tonight to experience God in His presence. Let's go on beyond tonight, beyond the transactional prayers that sometimes we reduce our relationship with God. Let's expand this dynamic love relationship, this love story that exists between us and a higher power. You know, each of us have a desire to control our lives. Our ego demands this of us. Many of us feel the comfort of this perceived control. But is it real control? Or is it the perception of control? In other words, are we living under the illusion that we have more power than we really have? When we surrender, what are we really leaving behind? Is it an illusion? Perhaps we're only giving up a shadow, a fictional perception of the comfort of the ego. So in fact, we're not leaving anything behind. See, we really suffer from the lack of power under the illusion that we have control. We learn about surrendering, which brings us closer and towards a true reality. When you examine it, it's interesting. You know, when we look at reality, we look outward and external things, and they look permanent to us. They look like something that we can have and get and keep. But there isn't anything external that's permanent. It's a paper mache world. It's a fantasy world, in fact. That external world changes constantly. And just when you think you have something, it goes. You know, that new car gets driven off the parking lot. That new house has a leaky roof. That new job has more pressure and stress than you anticipated. Nothing seems to be what it actually is. It seems to be something else. We trust the external world as being permanent and lasting forever. But another look, another longer look, a look through history, we come to realize this is all just temporary. And we put our trust in the sense that the external world is real and it isn't temporary. But meditation is very different. We go internal. We go internal to see the eternal, something that is permanent. We open up to a love relationship of a creator. You know, getting back to this idea of control, who among us can really brag about what we can control when we can't even stop us from getting a cold? You ever tried stopping diarrhea? It's an old saying, by the way, before everything was politically correct. It's impossible. Or even our death. Death of others we care about. We can't control our bosses, our neighbors, our communities. And do we even do a good job at controlling ourselves? You know, I joked with a couple of my friends this week about how am I going to speak for 1 hour about being silent. So my talk needs to be understood as a bit humorous and narrow and superficial, because You really can't speak about being silent. But I'm sure if you got on here and I was to remain silent for 60 minutes, I know that Fellowship of the Spirit wouldn't appreciate that. See, silence is special. You know, we're great talkers. We need to be heard, understood. We talk and we talk and we talk more. Sometimes we're uncomfortable with a moment of silence. I'm sure you've heard chair people say, let's have a moment of silence, then immediately begin the Serenity Prayer. You know, it reminds me about how quickly when I'm stopped at a stoplight and the light turns green and the car behind me honks the horn for me to get moving. It's an instant. Today, we're plugged into 24/7 AirPods, iPhones, music, radio, TV, Audible, the incessant chatter. Leaving that world behind may seem uncomfortable and even scary. We haven't been listening to our thoughts we've been having. It's as if we're all asleep, walking around in a daze in a zombie-like conditioning, following the demands of old ideas and old habits. Thoughts pass through our minds and into our speech without consideration or concern. It is my right as an individual to speak my mind, isn't it? Or would it be wiser to be more conscious about my thoughts, weighing them before I speak against a valued judgment? So to get started in silence, perhaps I can start by being a little more conscious about when I do speak. The rule I've adopted for myself is I talk about only what is good, beautiful, and true. That was the beginning for me on this road of silence. You see, I watch what I say today. I'm cautious. I want to speak with respect and kindness and loving. And I want to make sure whatever I'm thinking gets filtered into something that won't harm anyone. Ever notice you never get in trouble for being silent? You only get in trouble for when you speak, saying the wrong words at the wrong times at different people. But silence can never get in trouble. So as I started to listen and be cautious in what I was speaking, this became an interesting transition for me. I got interested in my fellows, what's important to them. Practice empathetic and active listening. Learning to be understand rather than to be understood. A change was afoot in me. And how did this change take place? What happened? What was the first cause or the motivation to start to recognize the other? See, I learned that God's first language was silence. And my first language was to be heard. You know, the Spirit led me to an introductory talk on a meditation given by a Benedictine monk under the guidance of Father John Main, who is an author and a priest. I was 24 years sober. And I came to a point in my life, which I today call, is that all there is phase. And I wasn't meditating. So a combination of reading all the material I could get my hands on, see, still needed the perception of control. And I co-created a meditation AA group some 25 years ago. And I began to take silence to heart. I was 24 years sober and I wasn't meditating. And I admire the younger people with shorter sobriety that's taking on meditation. It's an example of how the Spirit is working within our community. So I'm 24 years sober. Is that all there is phase? And I began to meditate. Now, meditation, one might think, and I used to think this way, that I had to be disciplined enough to meditate. And I want you to hear in that statement the self-centeredness, the control that I was exerting on myself rather than being invited to be meditating. You see, I thought it was me that had to do this. And of course, you know what happened? I had the intention of meditating and I wouldn't meditate because, as I heard myself say, I wasn't disciplined enough. See, still trying to play God, still trying to exert my control. Although this time it's for a good purpose, but the result was the same. Some days I would, most days I wouldn't. Very sporadic. But I come to realize that my willpower in this sense is like a muscle. It gets tired. And that if I'm just trying to do it on my own willpower, I can never accomplish what it is I wanted to accomplish. So I started understanding this idea of me having an inherent desire to control, playing God. And as I began to meditate in this journey, I began to see how I was being invited to meditate. This God of mine was unrelenting, inviting me to come and see. Come and see. An invitation to come and see. But what did I have to do? I had to fill my mind with books. I had to tell you everything there was about meditation so I could impress you. I could tell you how to meditate because I read many books on meditation, because that's how I operated. But I couldn't share the experience with you because I wasn't experiencing meditation. Oh, I had the head knowledge, but I didn't have the experience because I'm trying to do it on my own. Does any of this sound familiar to you? I was given enough grace to realize that if I tried to meditate on my own, I probably wouldn't be successful. And that's the reason I started a meditation group, because I had a like-minded group of people, a small group of people that wanted to meditate themselves. And I knew if I would show up, they knew that I was the co-creator of this group, that I would conform to meditation because of their expectation. And it worked. See, I needed a group of people that looked at me to say, you know what, you are a meditator, and we come here. I had to pick up my game. Slowly, I began to meditate every day, twice a day. So what does it take? This is so simple. What does it take to begin meditation? Well, all it takes is a minute to get started. And we're going to go through somewhat of a method later on. But what I want you to get is it doesn't take much. It doesn't take effort. You're sitting, you're surrendering, you're letting go, and you're giving up playing God and allow God to be God and for me to be me. Very simple. You know, a lot of books have been written about meditation, friends, but I can tell you it's as simple as that. It's a practice. It's a natural practice. You can't screw this up, in other words. You don't have to ask yourself, am I doing this right? The Spirit is leading you in doing it right. This practice started changing everything about the way I thought about my life. Changed everything. You know, we AAs, we talk about this idea that either God is everything or he's nothing. Two extreme ideas. He's everything or he's nothing. And sometimes, if you're like me, you repeat that phrase to look smart. Oh, God is either everything or he's nothing. But what are the implications of that? What is it when we say to ourselves that God is everything? What does that mean? How does that look? What does it sound like every day in the speech or the talk I have with other people? Do I see God sometimes and not other times? Of course. Am I looking for God during the day? Am I noticing the miracles in which God is presenting, the gifts he's presenting me each and every day of my life? Am I noticing? Is God everything or he's nothing? Non nisi te domine was a Latin phrase. Non nisi te domine. Nothing but you, Lord. St. Thomas Aquinas, 1225. So in the Middle Ages, this doctor of the church was praying the same thing which is written in the big book, that God is everything. Nothing but you, Lord. Non nisi te domine. Do I have that experience, that God consciousness, that nothing I want but you? No, I hate going off script because I can never find out where it's end off. So, Father John Main was teaching me to meditate through his books and through his tapes. And I began this beautiful journey. Wilson calls it the language of the heart, the inner experience to be extended outward. So silence is one of the many contrary actions, a paradox, if you like, of what came naturally to me. So rather than speaking, I began listening. And I started separating myself from my thoughts in silence. I always thought about speaking rather than listening, correcting rather than being silent. I had to tell you what I knew. See, self-centeredness happens at every level of my being. And I started on this amazing, amazing spiritual adventure. So let's get ourselves set up. What to expect? What are the distractions? How am I going to deal with distractions in my life? All of this white noise that is happening around me. Maybe you live in a busy household. Maybe you live near a construction site. Maybe you live near an airport. There's distractions that there's nothing you can do about. What do I do? So one thing's for sure, distractions are predictable. So you're never going to find that beautiful spot unless you're very fortunate. That's quiet all the time. So we have to prepare ourselves for distractions. Of course, the biggest distraction we have is our minds. They wander, moving from the past to the future, and if you're lucky enough, a little time in the present. So the first thing you're going to see in silence is how untamed your mind actually is. And some people at this point claim that they can't meditate because their mind is all over the place. It is colloquially called monkeys in the tree. And they kind of put down this idea of meditation and said, this is not for me. We need to expect our mind is untamed. You see, the main problem of alcoholics is centered in our minds. So we're going to have to confront this at some point. We're going to have to realize how unruly and mixed up the thinking actually is. So no worries, this is quite normal. It's not reason to give up or be impatient with yourself. Always be kind. Always be kind to yourself. You may get frustrated or concerned about doing this right. There's a perfectionism that comes forth. No worries, you can't screw it up. Drop this idea of being perfect. Try not to judge. And think of it as a violent mental act. Judging. Comparing. Looking for results. This is what the mind does. That's what the brain does. It's looking for confirmation. It's looking for conclusions. It's looking to make decisions. It's looking for outcomes. It's looking for expectations. This is what the mind does. And when you begin to see that, you begin to see how the mind cannot be trusted on its own. So allow the Spirit to guide you perfectly in meditation. Allow. Now in meditation, we're about to lift the manhole cover off our unconscious mind. The place of our mind where we have absolutely no control over is in our unconscious. In the meditation, we lift this heavy manhole cover off. And it may be disturbing what comes out, or maybe even alarming. Unprocessed emotions may appear, painful memories, amends to be made. Know that this is a healing process, and there's nothing to be afraid of. Now picture, if you would, and imagine 4 levels of consciousness. The first level is thought. Imagine sailboats floating on the ocean. These sailboats represent thoughts. They just come and go. They're floating on top of the ocean, and they just keep moving along. They're just our thoughts. The second level of consciousness is awareness. That's the top of the ocean. We become aware of our thinking. We become aware of the sailboats. And we practice just allowing those sailboats to come and go. Then we continue down the ocean to the next level of consciousness, which is spiritual. An experience of this relationship that we begin to sense that this is far greater than anything we could ever imagine. Then we move down again to our true self, the God in you, that fourth level of consciousness, where we actually get to touch and see and experience the God within us. So meditation is always about the development of the relationship with God, inspired by the Spirit. And we rest in God's divine presence. This is not a mental discipline per se. It's not about controlling thoughts. There's many health benefits, by the way, but this is not the reason why we're meditating. The reason why we're meditating is to get in touch with this merciful and loving higher power, our true selves. And the method is always about that relationship intention and what gets inspired through the Spirit. So let's pick up a sacred word. My word is Maranatha, broken into 4 equal syllables. And it sounds like this: Ma, Ra, Na, Tha. Now, Maranatha is an Aramaic prayer phrase, means come, Lord. And the reason why I picked that word, because it doesn't conjure up any extra pictures, because it's a language in which I do not speak. Maranatha. So every breath I take, Ma, I breathe in, Ra, I breathe out, Na, I breathe in, Tha, I breathe out. So any word that we pick will become a sacred word to us after repetition. It will become meaningful to us. So some other suggestions, if you want: Abba, Mother, Kiri, Jesu, Yeshua, Christe, peace, shalom. Each of these words are short, one syllable. Pick a word, any word. And after using this word over and over again, it becomes sacred. It becomes a drumbeat. And there'll be a time, believe it or not, that you're no longer speaking that word, but that word is speaking back to you. It's a heartbeat. So here's some of the method. You sit down in a relaxed but good posture, position. You sit upright or be in a squatty yoga position. Keep the spine upright. So it's not about slouching. It's not about, you need to be erect because you need to be alert. You're about to experience the presence of God. You have both feet on the floor. And I often use my index fingers with my thumbs not to clench. So I've had a lot of tension at times. So in order for me not to clench my fists, I use this as a way of ensuring that I won't clench my fists. And you sit upright. Now, I recommend highly you continue to breathe while you're meditating. That's supposed to be a joke. Everything we do in meditation is sacred and spirit-driven. Let me just give you an example of what I'm saying to you. In the Hebrew tradition, this is 300 BC. Imagine 300 BC. They would never name their God. For them, naming meant that they understood and know what they were named or what they were naming. So they never named God. The word they associated with God was Yahweh, an ancient word that has lasted over the millennia when other words have fallen into obscurity. A word closely represents the holy breath. Now, I heard a Jewish teacher that although this word could not be spoken, would associate it with his holy breath. Yahweh, Yahweh. So what happens in that experience is that because we're not entitled to our next breath, that we've been given a sacred gift from God, we're starting to pay attention what it's like to be alive, what it's like to take our next breath. Yahweh. And the people's journey over the millennium have used this expression to pay attention to their breath. In meditation, we do that. We pay attention to our breath. Now, by doing that, I have to tell you what happens. We automatically lock into the present moment. When you're focusing on your breath, you're present. And the only place we can ever meet God is in the present moment. We'll never meet him in the past because the past doesn't exist. And we can't meet him in the future because it hasn't happened yet. The only place we can meet God is in this present moment. And the way for us to be present, automatically and quickly, is pay attention to the breath. Yahweh. Pay attention to the breath. Next, we consent to God's presence. We understand this is a dynamic relationship. We have to say yes to God. That's the word I use a lot, is allow. We have to say yes to God in the present moment so that he will present himself to us. We don't have to chase him. We don't have to merit anything. We don't have to be good people. We just have to allow and consent to God's presence. Next thing in meditation, I want you to close your eyes to symbolize that you're no longer attached to the world. When we close our eyes, just like a 2-year-old, you ever talk to a 2-year-old and they end up closing their eyes? It's like they're pretending you don't exist. Well, this is the same experience in meditation. When we close our eyes, the exterior world doesn't exist. So we close our eyes gently and we go inward. We start repeating that drumbeat of the sacred word over and over again. Now, friends, God isn't a statue. He is a loving relationship. He's dynamic. He lives. So this is what's going to happen. We are going to continue to think thoughts. Our job is not to fight those thoughts. Our job is not to try to stop those thoughts. That's considered violent. Force. Our job is to allow the thoughts to come and go. And we need to be gentle with ourselves. Imagine just being like a feather touching a piece of silk. And all we have to do when thoughts happen is to return to our sacred word. I suggest you don't change your word. You keep the same word until it becomes your drumbeat, your heartbeat, that it starts to speak to you. Friends, we don't control or stop thoughts. That's not what meditation is. Meditation is simply repeating the mantra over and over again. And as your mind starts to wander, you start to engage in some thoughts. And all you do is when you recognize what you're engaged in those thoughts is come back and do the mantra word gently, non-violently as possible. So you move from engagement to your sacred word, always gently, like a feather touching a piece of silk. And we flow down the channel of consent. We allow our Creator to heal, to change us, or to remain the same. This is God's work. It's not us. We no longer start playing God, nor are we no longer avoiding Him. We are in His presence. Distractions are inevitable. Noise, other people, birds, pets, outside construction is going to happen. And as soon as you realize you're distracted, without any personal judgment or self-criticism, simply go back to the sacred word. Don't resist thoughts. Allow the thoughts to be like a banner going across your mental stream, just like those sailboats. Just allow them to go. Don't read them or attempt to stop them. Simply go back to your sacred word. Have a friendly attitude towards your thoughts. Say something, oh, here they go again. And distance yourself from any emotional charge. It's okay. The only thing we need to do is to continue to go back to our sacred word. Our objective here, friends, is to be completely nonviolent, effortless as possible, with a minimum of activity. And we bask in the gaze of God's love. So, just to wrap this conversation up, unless Richard Rohr, if you follow Richard Rohr, you might have pulled this out. Someone gave it to me actually for tonight. Unless there is someone to hold and accompany us on these inner journeys, much of humanity cannot go deep enough inside. If only we knew who would meet us there and could say with St. Catherine of Genoa, the deepest me is God. Without such accompaniment, most of us will stay on the surface of our own lives, where small spiritness keeps us from being bothered by others. Yet with divine accompaniment, we will literally find our souls and the one who is lovingly dwells there for us. Friends, this has been a talk. It hasn't been an experience. I invite you to join the Instagram that we created for this series for different exercises about experiencing meditation or asking any questions throughout the week, or share some experiences you have about meditating. It's my hope that when you leave here this evening, that you'll go and experiment with these ideas and that you can find the deepest, truest you. in the presence of the person or the God that made you. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you very much for listening. Mickey, I turn it back to you.